Candyman is a movie about an artist named Anthony McCoy who goes in search of the Candyman legend and ends up in a rabbit's hole of horror. It follows the journey of him discovering more about this legend, the legend sort of coming back to life, and the trauma and pain that kind of comes with it.
Candyman.
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 Don't say that.
And this scene in particular is Anthony with an art critic who's kind of done a reversal on her opinion of his work. And it's what happens after he's dared her to say Candyman 5 times in the mirror.
Finley? I thought...
What?
I gotta go.
So some of what you're hearing in the moment where Anthony's looking into the mirror and sees the reflection of Sherman, some of that is sound effects, but a lot of what you're hearing underneath that I've done is create this composition that has a lot of voices in it. And I was thinking about, sort of speaking to this idea of apparitions or sort of layering the victims of voices past, as well as sort of this really piercing high pitch, which is a lot of FM synthesis that's moving around. And I wanted to really be able to excite the ear and play with psychoacoustics in that moment. So everything is really moving around. And also playing with this idea of illusion and the construct of what is reality and what is fantasy. Like it is what's happening doing so in real time, or is it this sort of almost like dreamlike state? So that's what I was really thinking about in that moment.
Yeah, I really love what you're saying, because that was so much of what we were trying to do, which was like, it's sort of like psychological warfare through sound. It's like, will the nightmare ever end? But at the same time, like with that high pitched sound that comes in, at the same time, I really find myself leaning into it, which I think is sort of Anthony's whole like fatal flaw. He's like, ooh, this is very dark and scary, but I want to keep going in and leaning in more. And I think the sound and the score that you built just does that so well. It like mirrors that journey so well.
Yeah, I was really thinking about the way that the characters were choreographed inside of the scene in the mirror, having mirror image movements of each other. And then there's this really dense low end thud that happens when it cuts to the hook and the hand. Where it's this almost a slow reaction with almost a breath being released, where it's almost like that threshold, which is the mirror, has been almost sort of breached. And then also right at the top of that scene, when Anthony's sitting in the other room after Finley has gone to the toilet, just before that, they're having this conversation, and the sound that you start to hear is this sort of whirring like feedback with these voices like tucked into it that are sort of careening like very, very, very low underneath, but it's almost like his position as the acolyte is starting to open up.
I love that sound that you put there, or the sounds that you put there at the top when he's waiting for Finley, because in the sound design we also have like they were just listening to like Fiona Apple's latest record, and and they get to the end, you hear the thud of the record kind of skipping at the end, and I feel like those two things match each other so well. So I like love that, how the soundscape starts and where it goes.
I think the things that I try to avoid with a genre-based film is leaning into tropes. I think that so often you hear very specific, very canned sounds or a sonic palette that's attached to any sort of a genre, and always want to be able to move away from that. I think for me, one thing that that we discussed a lot in the beginning was the original film and the original score, and how it's a very peculiar score that Philip Glass ended up making for that film. And it's not out of the realm of possibility that a 20th century composer would do a genre film like a horror film, but the particular sound palette that he used for that film was something that was quite a bit different and really interesting. And I wanted to be able to provide that in a way that was freestanding from the legacy with a certain nod to it, but being able to create, like basically build a world in which the language or the vocabulary that I had made was very specific to this world, which lives in the universe of the original film, but its own story, and it is its own work. And so this scene actually, something that I think is really interesting about this is the fact that the core of this composition that's in this scene I wrote while I was working, Nia, with you and Katrine in LA. That's where this started, and it was a really great way to work, because we were working in the same space, and you guys could work on the edit and show me the things that you were working down, and then I could take that back to my room and sit and work through an idea and then bring it down the hall to you. And so it was a really interesting way of working, and one that I think worked really well. And for this particular moment, it's a lot of FM synthesis, which is, basically it's like early digital synthesis, where it's a lot of sine waves stacked on top of each other, which produce a bell-like or a glass-like sound. It's very ringy and belly and glass-like. but then also the sort of squiggling that you start to hear at the end of the composition as the summoning has already happened and Anthony has come to this realization, knows that something bad is happening, and is trying to retreat. I was using this object, which is basically a contact mic inside of a block of wood with these metal rods in it. And I was using that, and I was bowing these metal rods, which created this really sort of creaky, tense sound. And so being able to make an electroacoustic work in that moment and use an acoustic element with an electronic element, and then also coupling that with the voice, the sort of choir of voices that I made, like singing to this, sort of, I wanted it to almost be siren-like, if that makes any sense.
I think it definitely is, yeah.
And I wanted...
You feel them drawn in, yeah.
Yeah. I wanted it to be inviting with consequences, if that makes any sense. There's definitely something wrong, but you're compelled to move towards it. So
yeah, dude, that's like, sorry. I'm just like remembering all like the conversations we had, and also just like the story is so much about like every time you summon Candyman, you are basically asking for it. Like, you know exactly what you're doing. And so I think this siren's call is so like important, like the way you phrase that, like it's so true, and it's so much like I think sometimes in scores you get like sounds, you're like, oh, I don't like the sound of it. It's kind of like making me want to turn away. But this is like, oh, this is really weird, but I need to lean into it.
Yeah.
Which I love. And then just to speak to like kind of like avoiding cliche, I remember when I was looking at this again, the part where we reveal that Sherman/Candyman's in the mirror, there's no jump scare sound. Yeah. And I know we talked a lot about like, I think we maybe have like one moment where there's like a jump scare sound, but we talked about like, that's just not this movie. Like, this is not the like, like sort of, scratchy violin moment. And that I'm so happy we're on the same page about that, because I think that just makes the movie really live in its own world.
Yeah. I think it really does. I think it has a very unique signature.
I know I really wanted to do going into it, which is why I was so happy when Ian introduced us at the, I think it was like the Us premiere after party or whatever. Yeah. And he was like, hey, have you met Robert? Like, you should just meet him. And I'm like, okay. You created this like unique, specific world of sound. And I think it really shines, especially in this scene.
I thought...
What? I was really excited about this death, I guess, in particular, because it's a kind of a more somber moment. It's a more grounded moment, I think, even though obviously he sees a demon ghost in the mirror. But it's like you have this moment of deep character grounding. And I wanted to make sure that with Finley, what we get wasn't just like, okay, he killed her. I also wanted it to be, okay, he killed her, but like, what is the context of that? Like, what is the greater world in which this is happening, and how does that world feel about this happening? And so pulling out from that window was my way of kind of showing kind of like urban disinterest in a way. I'm born and raised in New York City, and I love it here, but it's also very strange, bizarre. I think all cities are a strange, bizarre place where like amazing things happen, miracles happen, and also horrifying things happen. And we all kind of just go about our lives. And so I think in the same way with Finley, part of the reason also why I dropped out the score there is because I just wanted you to hear the city. Because what you hear is not a woman screaming or, her guts falling onto the ground. You just hear people going about their lives, and you see people in the other windows watching the football match or game, not match, because it's American football. And that was really important to me, that we just had a moment to live in that, which is kind of morose and depressing, but it's also Candyman. So
pulling back, when you have the perspective outside of the building, you have a greater understanding of the context of the structure, which in a way is mimicking a beehive.
100%, yeah.
You have this event that's happening inside of the hive, and the greater world outside is just like this sort of microcosm that's happening inside of this mythology.
And that's why I held that off until the end. Like, I didn't want to establish the building and then go in and I wanted that to be the last thing that you saw. I think establishing shots are obviously very necessary for storytelling, but the way you use them can be, you can hold them off, you can just use them in different ways, and having that honeycomb image at the end when Candyman has arrived, I think is really important. Why I wanted to work with him? Well, one, Robert sent me like a bunch of like tracks, like just a bunch of music, and we ended up actually using that in I mean, some of it's in the movie, but all of it we used as like temp score when we were playing the movie. But from that, I was like, oh, one, this person really gets what Philip Glass is doing. His brain is insane. I don't know what is going on in there, and I love that. And he's just a lovely human being. So it's just really like, the things that are really important to me: incredible talent, and diligence, a brain that is unique and exciting to see a glimpse inside of, and also a good person. So that's why for me.
Thanks.
Of course, Rob.